rain began just after midnight. Not the violent kind that crashes against rooftops like thrown stones, but the slow, cold rain that seemed to drift endlessly from the black sky above the forest. It covered the empty roads in silver reflections and wrapped the little town of Black Hollow in a silence so deep it almost felt sacred. Black Hollow sat between endless woods and forgotten farmland somewhere in the northern United States, though most people passing through would never remember seeing it. The town had one gas station, one church, a diner that closed before dark, and streets that looked abandoned even during the day. Daniel Mercer preferred towns like that, places where people trusted too easily, places where lonely porch lights still glowed late into the evening for strangers. He drove slowly through Miller Road, with one hand resting on the steering wheel and the other drumming lazily against the door. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with tired rhythm, barely keeping the rain away. The old pickup in front of him coughed smoke before disappearing down another road. Daniel smiled faintly. Small towns, old people, easy money. He hated admitting how good he had become at it. At 34 years old, Daniel had perfected a little scam that sat somewhere between cruelty and survival. He told himself it wasn't really evil, not compared to what other people did. He never carried weapons, never hurt anyone, never broke bones or pointed guns. He simply found lost dogs before their owners did. Then he returned them for reward money. That was all. At least that was how he justified it whenever guilt tried crawling into his chest late at night. Sometimes he stole the dogs himself. Sometimes he simply waited near forests, roads, or empty highways until frightened animals wandered far enough from home. After that, it was easy. A few days of keeping them hidden, a carefully timed phone call, a fake story about finding the poor thing near the river, and suddenly grateful owners were handing him envelopes filled with cash while crying tears of relief. People loved dogs more than people. Daniel had learned that years ago, and desperate people could make a living from love. The cigarette between his fingers glowed orange inside the darkness of the truck. Rain whispered against the windows. The radio crackled softly with old jazz music. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then he saw the dog. It stood perfectly still in the middle of Miller Road. Daniel frowned, and slowly eased his foot onto the brake pedal. The headlights washed over the animal, illuminating thick black fur soaked by rain. It was large, bigger than most strays he had dealt with before. Maybe a shepherd mix, maybe something older. But what unsettled him wasn't the size. It was the stillness. The dog didn't bark, didn't panic, didn't move. It simply stared toward the forest beside the road, as though something inside those woods held its complete attention. Daniel honked once. Nothing. "Move, buddy," he muttered. The dog slowly turned its head toward him. Its eyes reflected pale yellow beneath the headlights. Something about those eyes made his stomach tighten. Not aggressive, not frightened, almost human. Daniel cursed under his breath before grabbing the flashlight from the passenger seat and stepping out into the rain. Cold wind rushed instantly through his jacket. Mud soaked beneath his boots as he approached the animal carefully. Easy now. The dog watched him without resistance. No growling, no retreat. Up close, Daniel noticed the old leather collar wrapped around its neck, cracked with age, nearly falling apart. Attached to it was a tiny rusted metal tag. Daniel wiped rainwater from the tag with his thumb. His smile faded. "Don't let him in." That was all it said. No phone number, no address, no name. Just those 4 words. A chill crawled slowly along Daniel's spine. He glanced instinctively toward the forest. The trees stood motionless beyond the roadside ditch, tall and endless beneath the darkness. Rain slid softly through their branches. Somewhere deep inside, something creaked. Daniel suddenly became aware of how alone he was. No headlights, no houses, no sound except rain. The dog finally looked back toward the woods again. Its body stiffened slightly. Daniel followed its gaze but saw nothing. "Jesus," he whispered to himself. "You're getting paranoid." He grabbed the collar gently. The dog obeyed immediately. That bothered him more than if it had fought. Most lost dogs were terrified. This one acted as though it had already accepted something much worse. Daniel's house sat near the edge of town, surrounded by dying pine trees and an old chain-link fence leaning inward with rust. The place had once belonged to his father before cancer hollowed him out like rotten wood. Now the house belonged to silence. Daniel pushed open the front door, and the dog stepped inside without hesitation. The old floorboards groaned beneath muddy paws. "You're lucky I found you first," Daniel muttered, while tossing his wet jacket over a chair. The dog ignored him. It walked slowly into the living room and sat beside the dark window facing the backyard, watching. Always watching. Daniel filled a metal bowl with water and another with leftover meat from the refrigerator. The dog touched neither. Instead, it continued staring toward the back door, toward the woods behind the house. "You're creepy as hell, you know that." No reaction. Daniel lit another cigarette and sank heavily onto the couch. The rain outside deepened as night stretched onward. Normally he enjoyed these moments. Quiet nights, easy money waiting tomorrow. He would put up a few anonymous posts online in the morning. Someone would claim the dog eventually, maybe $1,000 reward if he was lucky. But tonight felt different. Wrong somehow. The dog hadn't blinked in nearly a minute. Its ears twitched suddenly. Then came the whistle. Soft, distant, barely audible beneath the rain. Daniel froze. The dog immediately stood up. A low growl vibrated from deep inside its chest. Daniel stared toward the kitchen. The whistle came again. 3 slow notes. Human. Outside. What the hell? He stood carefully and moved toward the back door. The dog stepped in front of him instantly, growling harder now. Its yellow eyes locked onto the darkness beyond the glass. Daniel forced out a nervous laugh. "Relax. Probably somebody drunk walking home." But even as he spoke, he didn't believe it. Nobody walked near these woods after midnight. Nobody. The whistle came a third time. Closer now. The dog barked violently. Daniel nearly jumped. All right. He grabbed the flashlight from the counter and pulled the curtain aside sharply. Nothing. Only rain. Wet grass. Dark trees swaying softly beyond the fence. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You see?" he muttered. Then lightning flashed across the sky. For less than a second, the forest lit up in silver light, and Daniel saw someone standing between the trees. Tall, thin, motionless, watching the house. The flashlight slipped slightly in Daniel's trembling hand. When darkness returned, the figure was gone. He stood frozen beside the window, unable to breathe properly. The dog whimpered softly now, instead of growling, as if fear had replaced anger. Daniel swallowed hard and locked the back door, even though it had already been locked. Then he checked the front door, then the windows, then the deadbolt again. By the time he returned to the living room, the dog had laid down beside the couch without taking its eyes off the darkness outside. Daniel tried convincing himself it was nothing. Some hunter, some stranger, his imagination. But deep down, something ancient and instinctive whispered another truth into his chest. The thing he saw in the woods had not been surprised to find the dog there. It had come looking for it, and somehow, it knew exactly where to look. The whistling man Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the couch until dawn, the cigarette in his fingers burning down to ash, more than once before he remembered to put it out. The dog stayed beside him, not curled up like a pet, not resting like an animal that had been rescued, but sitting upright like a guard posted before a royal tomb. Outside, the rain continued, until the first pale light of morning touched the wet windows. By then, Daniel had almost convinced himself that what he had seen in the trees had been nothing more than a trick of lightning. Almost. When the sun finally rose over Black Hollow, the woods behind his house looked ordinary again. Dark pines, muddy earth, bent branches dripping rainwater. There was no tall figure between the trees, no strange man waiting in silence, no explanation for the whistle that had crawled through the storm at exactly 2:13 in the morning. Daniel stood at the kitchen window with a cup of bitter coffee cooling in his hand. The dog sat behind him, watching the same place. "You're not helping," Daniel muttered. The dog did not move. By 9 o'clock, Daniel had done what he always did when he picked up a dog. He took pictures. He posted vague messages online. Found large black dog near Miller Road. Must describe collar to claim. He didn't mention the words on the tag. Don't let him in. Those 4 words had stayed in his head all morning, repeating themselves, with the rhythm of a church bell tolling for the dead. He checked lost pet groups, town notice boards, local pages, and even drove to the tiny gas station near the main road to ask if anyone had reported a missing black dog. The woman behind the counter was old enough to have known every family in Black Hollow for 3 generations. Her name was Marla, and she had the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many winters bury too many people. When Daniel described the dog, she stopped counting change. "Black fur?" she asked. "Yeah. Big. Pretty big. Yellow eyes." Daniel felt something tighten beneath his ribs. You know it. Marla did not answer immediately. She looked past him out toward the gray morning beyond the gas station windows. Then she said quietly, "Where did you find it, Miller Road?" Her face changed. Not much. Just enough. Like a curtain moving in a room where no window was open. "You should have left it there," she said. Daniel forced a laugh. "That's a little dramatic, don't you think?" Marla looked at him then, and there was no humor in her eyes. "Some things in this town don't get lost, Mr. Mercer. They get sent back." Daniel had not told her his name. For one cold second, he forgot how to breathe. Before he could ask what she meant, the bell above the gas station door rang, and two men walked in laughing about the rain. The moment broke. Marla turned away and pretended to arrange cigarette cartons behind the counter. Daniel left without buying anything. On the drive home, he kept glancing at his rearview mirror. The road behind him stayed empty. Still, he felt watched. By afternoon, the dog had still not eaten. Daniel tried canned meat, bread, leftover chicken, even a bowl of milk, though he knew dogs weren't supposed to have too much of it. The animal only sniffed once, then returned to the back window. That irritated Daniel more than it should have. He was used to animals needing him, needing food, water, warmth, a car ride home, a lie told in a kind voice. This dog needed nothing from him. It was as if Daniel had not rescued the dog at all, as if the dog had allowed Daniel to take it. That thought stayed with him. As evening fell, Black Hollow became a different place after sunset. The streets emptied early. Windows glowed amber behind curtains. The church bell tower stood black against the violet sky, and the woods surrounding town seemed to lean closer, as though listening. Daniel locked every door before dark. He hated himself for doing it. He hated the weakness of it. He had spent years manipulating fear in others. He knew exactly how frightened people sounded when they thanked him for returning what they loved. He knew the trembling in their hands, the desperate relief in their voices. He knew how easy it was to turn love into money. But now fear had found him, and it knew his address. At 2:10 inches the morning, Daniel was awake. He sat at the kitchen table with the lights off and his phone in front of him, camera app, open hands, slightly damp. The dog stood in the living room. Its body had gone rigid. 211. The house creaked once. 212. The dog began to growl. Low. Deep. A sound from somewhere older than domestication. Daniel slowly stood. Then at exactly 213 the whistle came. 3 notes. Soft and patient. From the edge of the woods. The dog barked so violently that Daniel stumbled backward into the table. "Shut up," he whispered, though his own voice sounded broken. The whistle came again. Closer. Daniel raised his phone toward the back window and zoomed into the darkness. At first there was nothing but grainy black shapes, shifting rain mist and pale tree trunks. Then the screen focused. A figure stood beyond the fence. Tall. Too tall. Thin as a dead branch. Its head was tilted slightly to one side. Daniel's thumb trembled over the record button. The figure did not move. Neither did the dog. For nearly 30 seconds, Daniel recorded. Then, the phone screen glitched. Just once. A streak of white static. When the image returned, the figure was closer, now standing inside the fence. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. No, he breathed. The back gate was still locked. He had checked it twice. The dog lunged toward the back door, barking with such rage and terror that spit flew from its jaws. Daniel backed away, nearly tripping over a chair. The figure outside lifted one long arm. Not to wave. Not to knock. Just to point. At the dog. Daniel could not see its face clearly, but he had the sickening sense that it was smiling. Then the kitchen filled with a smell so foul that he gagged. Wet soil. Rotten leaves. Old meat. Something buried and dug up again. The dog let out a sound that was almost a cry. Daniel grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, though he knew how ridiculous it was. He knew no weapon made sense against whatever was standing outside his house. The figure took one more step toward the back door. And then the dog did something Daniel did not expect. It turned from the door and ran toward the basement. Daniel followed, without thinking. "Hey, where are you going?" The dog scratched violently at the basement door, whining now, desperate as if something below was worse than something outside. Daniel froze. He had not gone into that basement in months. His father had kept old tools down there, jars of screws, paint cans, a workbench covered in dust. After his father died, Daniel had left most of it untouched. Grief had a way of turning ordinary rooms into locked churches. The dog scratched harder. The whistle came again from outside. But now Daniel heard something else. From beneath the floorboards, a faint metallic sound, dragging, like a chain being pulled slowly across concrete. Daniel stared at the basement door. His mouth went dry. "No," he whispered. "Absolutely not." Then a voice rose from below, so faint he almost missed it. "Bring him back." Daniel stepped away from the door. The dog stopped scratching. The house went silent. For one terrible moment, Daniel remembered another dog. Not this one, a smaller one. Old, brown, half-blind. A dog he had taken from a front yard almost 3 years earlier, because there had been a handwritten poster on a telephone pole offering $800 for its return. The old woman who owned it had cried when Daniel called her. She told him the dog was all she had left after her husband died. Daniel had kept that dog in a shed outside an abandoned property for 2 nights. It had been winter, colder than he expected. When he came back, the dog was dead. He never called the woman. He never returned the body. He simply drove away and told himself accidents happened. Now, standing in the dark hallway with the black dog trembling beside him, Daniel felt that memory open inside him like a wound. The whistle outside stopped. The dragging below stopped. And then something knocked on the basement door. Once, from the other side. Daniel ran. He did not remember deciding to run. One moment he was standing in the hallway, and the next he was in his bedroom with the door locked, the dog pushing in after him before he slammed it shut. For the rest of the night, Daniel sat against the wall with the iron poker across his knees while the dog lay beside him, breathing hard. Nothing else happened. No whistle, no dragging, no knocking. But just before dawn, Daniel heard a sound from the backyard. A soft jingle, like metal tags on a collar. When morning came, he found muddy footprints outside the back door. Human footprints, long and narrow. They led from the fence to the porch, but none led away. Daniel stood over them in the cold morning light, shaking so badly he had to grip the railing. The dog stood beside him, staring into the trees. Daniel whispered, "What are you?" For the first time since he had found it, the dog looked up at him, and in its pale yellow eyes, Daniel saw something he had not expected. Not evil, not hunger, not madness. Warning. That was when Daniel understood. The thing in the woods was not hunting the dog. The dog was keeping it away. Don't let him in. Daniel spent the next day doing what guilty men always do when fear gets too close. He searched for explanations. He checked the locks again. He walked around the fence. He looked for holes in the wet earth, broken branches, footprints leading back into the woods. But the more he searched, the less the world made sense. The muddy footprints outside the back door were still there. Long, narrow, human enough to be terrifying. But they stopped at the porch. There was no trail back to the trees. No marks where anyone had turned around. No sign that whoever had stood there had ever left. Daniel took photographs with his phone, though. He knew he would never show them to anyone. What would he say? That a man from the woods had come for a dog, with a warning carved into its collar. That something under his basement had whispered about a dead animal he had abandoned 3 winters ago. Men like Daniel did not call the police. Not because they were brave, because the truth always carried other truths behind it. By afternoon, the dog finally drank water. It lowered its head to the bowl and drank slowly, almost ceremonially, then returned to the back window. Daniel watched it from the kitchen table with red eyes and a heart made heavy by memories he had spent years burying. There had been so many dogs. He had forgotten most of their names because he had never cared enough to learn them. A golden retriever with a blue ribbon. A little white terrier whose owner had kissed its head so many times that Daniel had looked away in embarrassment. A gray old mutt with clouded eyes. The one that died. That one returned to him now with unbearable clarity. The small brown dog in the cold shed. The stiff body. The frost on its whiskers. The way Daniel had stood there for only a few seconds before turning away. He had told himself it wasn't murder. He had told himself a lot of things. Outside, the sky darkened early. By 6, Black Hollow had vanished into winter dusk. The trees behind the house became black ribs against a bloodless sky. Daniel nailed an old board across the basement door, because he could not stand looking at it anymore. Every hammer strike sounded too loud in the silent house. The dog watched him work. "You know something?" Daniel said, breathing hard. "Don't you?" The dog only stared. Daniel laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Of course you do." At 9:47, the power went out. The house dropped into darkness so suddenly that Daniel stumbled backward from the kitchen counter. The refrigerator died. The old clock stopped ticking. The world outside became a wall of black glass. Then the dog began to growl. Daniel whispered, "No." From somewhere deep in the woods came the whistle. 3 slow notes. Soft, patient, almost tender. The sound moved through the dark like a hand sliding along the walls. Daniel grabbed the iron poker and backed toward the hallway. The dog stood between him and the back door, every muscle tense, yellow eyes fixed on the glass. The whistle came again, closer than ever before. Then came the knock. Not from the back door, from the front. 3 heavy knocks. Boom, boom, boom. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The dog turned its head toward the front of the house and let out a low, miserable whine. The knock came again. Boom, boom, boom. Daniel did not move. A voice followed. It was thin and wet, like air passing through a throat filled with mud. "He came home." Daniel shut his eyes. The words seemed to enter him through the bones. "He belongs outside." The dog barked, once sharp and furious. Daniel stepped backward until his shoulder hit the wall. "Go away," he tried to say, but the sound barely left his mouth. The front doorknob turned. Slowly. Left. Right. Left. The deadbolt held. For a moment. Then the wood around the lock began to creak. Daniel turned and ran for the basement door, though he did not know why. Maybe some part of him understood that the answer had always been below him. Maybe fear had finally stripped him of all lies. He tore the board away with shaking hands. The dog barked behind him. The front door groaned under impossible pressure. Daniel opened the basement door. Cold air rose from below. It smelled of wet earth and old fur. He descended with the flashlight on his phone, trembling in his hand. The stairs complained beneath him. At the bottom, his father's old basement waited in dust and shadow. Paint cans, toolboxes, a broken chair, cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. Then Daniel saw the metal chain. It lay coiled near the workbench. He knew it. He had used it years ago when he kept dogs hidden before returning them. He had told himself he threw it away. Beside it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed, damp, waiting. Daniel picked it up with numb fingers. It was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local man found dead in woods." After animal cruelty investigation, Daniel's flashlight flickered. The article described a man named Elias Ward, a recluse who had lived beyond Miller Road years earlier. Neighbors had heard dogs crying from his property. Police found cages behind his cabin. Starved animals. Chains nailed to trees. Bones buried in shallow pits. Elias disappeared before trial. Weeks later, hunters found his body in the woods. The article said wild animals had torn him apart, but someone had circled one sentence in black ink. Locals claimed they heard a man whistling in the woods the night after his body was found. Daniel's hands shook so violently the paper nearly fell. Above him, the front door splintered. The dog snarled. Something stepped into the house. The floorboards groaned under slow, heavy weight. Daniel backed away from the stairs, whispering prayers he had not spoken since childhood. Then he heard it. A soft jingle. A collar tag. The black dog appeared at the top of the basement stairs, blocking the doorway, like a shadow carved from night. Behind it stood the figure. Daniel's flashlight caught only pieces. Long legs. A coat hanging like wet skin. Hands too thin. A face hidden beneath darkness. And in one hand the figure held a leash made of old chain. The dog growled. The figure whistled. The sound made Daniel's teeth ache. He took what wasn't his, the thing whispered. Daniel understood then. It was not only talking about the dog. It was talking about every dog. Every lie, every trembling owner. Every stolen piece of love Daniel had turned into cash. He dropped the iron poker. For the first time in years, he did not try to escape responsibility. He fell to his knees in the basement dust. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out broken, small, useless. "I'm sorry. I didn't care. I should have cared." The figure tilted its head. The dog looked back at Daniel. And for one strange, unbearable second, Daniel thought of the old brown dog in the shed. He imagined it warm, safe, carried home. He He imagined the old woman answering the phone and hearing good news instead of silence. His chest collapsed under the weight of what he had done. "I'll take him back," Daniel whispered. "Wherever he came from, I'll take him back." The figure stepped onto the first stair. The dog lunged. What happened next, Daniel could never properly remember. There was a roar unlike any animal sound he had heard. A blast of cold wind. The flashlight went out. Something slammed against the basement wall hard enough to crack wood. Daniel covered his head and screamed as the whistle twisted into something terrible, something almost human, almost grieving. Then silence. When Daniel opened his eyes, dawn light was leaking faintly through the tiny basement window. The dog was gone. The figure was gone. The chain lay broken across the stairs. Daniel crawled out of the basement and found the front door hanging open. Rain had blown into the hallway. Mud covered the floorboards. On the porch sat the old leather collar. The rusted tag was still attached, but the words had changed. "Not yours to keep." Daniel took it with both hands and began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, exhausted crying of a man who had finally seen himself clearly. The police came later that morning after a neighbor reported the broken door. Daniel told them someone had tried to break in. They found no fingerprints, no footprints outside, no sign of forced entry except the shattered lock. They asked about the dog. Daniel said it had run away. That was partly true. Over the next few weeks, Daniel changed. Not beautifully, not completely. Life rarely works that way. He did not become a saint, but he stopped taking dogs. He deleted every fake post. He returned 3 animals he had been keeping without asking for a cent. He even drove 60 miles to leave an envelope of money in the mailbox of the old woman whose brown dog had died. No note, no explanation. Just money he knew could never repay anything. Winter passed slowly. Black Hollow thawed beneath pale spring rain. Daniel began volunteering at the county shelter twice a week. He cleaned cages, filled bowls, walked nervous dogs along muddy paths behind the building. He never told anyone why. One night, nearly 2 months after the incident, Daniel came home late from the shelter. The house was quiet. The woods behind it were black. He locked the door, checked the windows, and stood for a moment in the hallway listening to nothing. Then came a sound from the porch. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Daniel froze. His hand tightened around the keys. Slowly, he opened the front door. A small brown dog sat on the porch. Old, wet, half-blind. Daniel stopped breathing. Around its neck was a collar he had never seen before. Attached to it was a clean silver tag. With trembling fingers, Daniel turned it over. The words carved into it were simple. "He found you too." From the woods behind the house, a whistle drifted through the darkness. 3 soft notes. Daniel looked toward the trees. This time he did not run. He picked up the little dog, held it carefully against his chest, and closed the door before the night could come in.